Hello, everyone. Santier here, and it's time for an update on Astral Collision. It's been a while since the last video, and the purpose of that video is primarily to announce a hiatus. At the time, I was feeling kind of burnt out. I was feeling like I had to try to force myself to do anything to have anything to talk about in the weekly update video on the project. And that wasn't going well for me, and it was no longer a fun experience, so on and so forth. That hiatus has gone on a bit longer than I had originally intended, and that distance has given me an opportunity to realize maybe this isn't the game I should be working on right now. So I want to discuss and kind of analyze that. Basically, to put it in no hopefully ambiguous terms, to make it fairly straightforward, I'm not planning on continuing Astral Collision, at least not in RPG Maker. Now, this video, the purpose of it is to explain that decision and the thinking that goes into it and all of these things. And I hope that in doing so, you'll get as much out of my attempting to piece my brain together and my thoughts and my motivations and all that as hopefully I will as well. So this should hopefully be something for both of us. I do anticipate it being fairly long, but as I don't script these things, I have no idea. So let's just kind of start with ambition in terms of game design. That to me is kind of the central theme here. Astral Collision, and my planned title for this is Astral Collision and Overambition. Feels like it has a little bit of a nice ring to it, but the point is important. This project is overambitious, especially for an RPG Maker project. And the reason why I say that is because RPG Maker as a tool is very... it's very flexible on the code end, but the interface that you're working with here, that thing this way, which feels very weird because I'm pointing away from my monitor, but this interface over here that I'm working with is extremely limited in what its capacity is. So I may return to Astral Collision, but it will not be an RPG Maker. It will, if I do return to this project, it will be in a very different tool, probably something more like Unity, where I just have a lot more power to control and shape things. And it will not be this style. It'll probably be more of a tactics game. There's important reasons for that as well, which we'll get into. I'm not entirely sure where the best place to start is, but maybe let's just talk about my goals some. So I had several different objectives when making this kind of at the outset. I wanted to explore some stuff with world building, but that kind of fell out of things. Where I really began was over here, not up there, but down here, with making these characters. I made this character selection area, and I put in a bunch of characters. I've had a lot of RPG Maker projects kind of stall out on me, and there's been a lot of different reasons why. The big ones are, so many of them are related to RPG Maker itself as a tool. Just making certain things, like, it simplifies certain things, but that simplification necessarily complicates other things. So, for example, this is a very simple one, but it's so key to a recurring issue. Show choices right here. I can put in up to 6 choices, and then there's good reasons for that, right? How much space it takes up in the interface and all that. I don't have a complaint about 6 choices. But I don't have the ability to make the scrolling. I don't have the ability to put 9 choices here and have you scroll between them and have it kind of have little up-down arrows to indicate that you can go up and down. I don't have the ability to dynamically add choices in here. It's static. Whatever choices I present here are the choices that are. And so you have to do all sorts of state switching and other things to make other choices show up. And if you start having multiple conditional choices, it starts getting extremely complex. You can't just slot in a choice, right? You have to be here are the choices that are available to you. Let me figure out a way of presenting them all. It starts becoming really onerous very quickly. And I need to make sure I glance down so that way I'm not having my face covering something. So this is a huge problem in RPG Maker. If you're trying to do any sort of more dynamic storytelling, anything that's more dynamic in the choices it's presenting, stuff that doesn't expand linearly, but rather sort of piecemeal. This is something I keep running into. So I have had a good number of projects that have basically stalled out because I want to do stuff that's more open, more freeform, not as linear. And what ends up happening with that fundamentally is like, oh, the order in which you get characters causes problems. So if you go, here's an example of a project. It's kind of a dream world project. There's a bunch of dream worlds, and you go into these different worlds, and you recruit the dreamer from that world. And so there's like one based off of Ocarina of Time, because that keeps coming up as a recurring theme, because it's an interesting setting. There's one based off of something. I forget what they're all based off of. That was the one that I remember most clearly. But it's like there was 8 different dream worlds, and the order at which they opened up to you would be randomized each time, and then you'd get different characters in different order into your party, but then that suddenly means I don't know when they're in your party and when they're not, and so adding stuff to accommodate for that starts becoming extremely onerous, right? So I'm trying to make something like that, and it's like, okay, this doesn't work. Or other things where it's just like you wander around, then you encounter this person, then it's really hard to write them into the story. So what do? I go in and make a project of like, okay, I want to not have these character dynamic complications. Where the order in which you get characters is unknown, and that makes it really hard to write them into dialogue, so you just have kind of the main character that can speak, if they speak at all. And I'm like, okay, let's solve some of these problems. And like, I also have a tendency of like getting bogged down when I need to write a bunch of backstory and lore. So I go and make a project where I make all of those problems all over again. Sure, you get all of their characters at the start now, but I don't know which 4 are in your party, so I still can't have them be active characters, because writing like, oh, if your party is this group, then these are the people who speak these sentiments, or whatever. Like, it starts becoming like, okay, I just have to have your party be a non-entity, a silent protagonist that doesn't really actually say anything. Because if I wanted to have these characters actually express themselves and be part of the story and have thoughts and feelings and expressions on anything, it just becomes completely impossible to do, because there's no way with the way RPG Maker is set up to do that in anything that is not just like an absolute nightmare and a half. So they become non-entities. But then I decided, they're from different worlds, and all these worlds are colliding, because like I make this world map, and then I'm like, how is everything fitting into this world map? How do I have, advanced magic sciencey place and like just advanced sciencey place and then medieval place all in the same world, and how am I doing this? And they're all different worlds that got slammed together in this thing called the Astral collision. And that turns out to be a lot of world building, and what happens? I get bogged down in lore, and that's not too bad. It's not like, but it just like, you can see where there's these compounding problems where I keep running into these same like problems of overambition, where it's like I'm being ambitious about this thing, and it is causing the scope of what I have to create to make the project work just scream ahead. It just expands rapidly. And everything just becomes extremely complicated, and there's just too much going on. And I completely lose track of, or not lose track, but I just completely get stuck in like, okay, now that I've kind of like made some marks, I need to fill in what these marks mean, and I need to expand everything out. And this goes back to, I watched a Brandon Sanderson video where he was talking about writing, of course, but one of the things that he was saying is like it can take a bit to figure out what it is that you're actually like passionate about making, because the things that you're a fan of is not necessarily the things you should be making. So what does some of this mean? As I'm like trying to process my own self, right? I really like games with a lot of discovered lore. That's something that I really enjoyed about the Dark Souls series in particular, is this process of discovering lore of, okay, you found an artifact and here's some lore on it, or you found a weapon and here's some lore on it. The other thing that I'm a bit like, I want mechanics to be narratively justified. So, for example, why do your characters resurrect? It's a simple question, but like, I have a couple of mechanical things that I want. I don't like game over screens where you have to like reload a save. There's a bunch of reasons for it, but the long and short of it is like, it's just a giant headache to try to remember what it is that you've done and not done, and what items have you expended or not expended, how have you rearranged your inventory. Like, I've played games where it's like, oh, and then I died and I didn't save after doing a bunch of inventory management, and now I have to go do that inventory management again, and I don't remember what I'd done necessarily, and it's just like, I don't want to go through that tedium again, and it's a hassle, and it just like shuts me out of the game right there, because it's like, I don't want to deal with this again. And I don't like the idea that your way of handling game over is, well, I just reset the hands of time, because you know what that also encourages is save scumming, which I don't think is, like, to me, that's not the way that I want to play. I'd rather roll with the consequences of what happens, generally speaking. And so I just much prefer a Dark Souls style of handling player failure. Or another game that I've played a lot of, Guild Wars 1, your party wipes, boohoo, you resurrect at the nearest resurrection shrine, or you can go back to town or whatever. But it's like, death is fairly like, it's not without consequences. I want player failure to have some consequences. And in this case, it's like, okay, you have to traverse back to where you were, right? And I think that's a reasonable consequence. What I dislike is where the consequences are, you have to, like, you've been reset and you don't remember what you've done anymore, right? And I want your memory as the player to be able to not have to get rewound, to be able to be accurate. So then how do I justify this mechanic in the game? And so I justify it by like, oh, you're playing actually immortal characters that are getting respawned at this thing that they're bound to or whatever. And then that kind of unfolds. How's the world built from there? So I want to justify that mechanic, right? I want to figure out, okay, how does it actually fit into the lore and the world setting? And that adds complication. That adds constraints to the world that I'm building. And things kind of flow out of that. Right, so there's a lot of things where it's like there's certain mechanical things that I want, and then that just creates further complication. That just creates additional issues with how everything is working. Because then, like, what's the state of the world, right? Because if people just resurrect, then death becomes significantly less meaningful. And there's other complications as well. Like, you can do it, but like, if I'm doing that, I want to fully embrace the ramifications of it, if that makes sense. So there's a lot of that. Now, that's kind of like some of the mechanical aspect of things. And then I decide, you know what, I'm going to work with a world map. And then I make this world map without thinking about what these places are going to be. Then I have to make these places be somewhere, and I have to make all these additional interior maps, and it starts getting really tedious. And then I'm like, oh, I have so many areas here. Like, this is a freaking big world. And then I'm starting to worry about things like the map limit, which is not something I should ever have to worry about, but now I'm suddenly starting to worry about it. Plus, when you have a lot of maps, the organization system over here is just not great. There's no foldering system. The organization is tiered, yes, and it's nested, so it's better than just a flat list. But only the one side better than. So, like, I make this map, which is not anything, right? This map is nothing. It's just a folder, right? This is the Kendra folder map. And so I'm, like, trying to figure out how do I manage all of these things when I have multiple levels and all that sort of stuff. And so, anyway, getting back to that point of, like, maybe the thing that I'm most interested in is not necessarily the thing I should be building. That's an important question to ask. But the other thing that's important to ask is, like, what is this tool good at building? And I was just making too much stuff that lived in the plugins. Like, you click on this plugin, and I'm having to spend a lot of time making journal entries, filling stuff into this journal, and is not the prettiest interface. Like, it's what I got to work with, and is better than nothing. But, like, I want to talk about a location. I need to go, okay, what is the broad category of this location? And what are the things that are happening in like, what is an individual location? So we've got, like, here's the Kendra area entries, and here are the location entries for Kendra. And, I've got all of these things I need to fill out. Or gear. I have to go to each piece of gear. Like, this is armor, right? And I have to go to each one of these and go in, and I have to fill this in, and it's got very specific limitations on, like, sizing and spacing. There's just all sorts of stuff where it's just like, this is not a pleasant interface to work with. It functions, but it's not pleasant. Even worse in some regards, frankly, because this is, like, at least categorically organized, is crafting. Crafting is an important part of this, right? But the recipes are just an enormous list of recipes, and making a recipe is tedious. Like, I have to go, okay, here's an item that's being used, or here's the item that's being made, or the weapon that's being made, or the armor that's being made. Here's how many you make. Here's how much money is required. Here's the materials and items. So each one of these requires me to go into the individual item and be like, oh yeah, this requires wood. How much wood does it require? You can see, like, it's like, oh, it requires 5 wood. What if I want it to be another item? you can see what I'm talking about. Is like it's a whole process of like clicking in and out and in and out and in and out. It's just very, very, very tedious, and that's just because of the nature of this interface, right? This is what I have to work with. So then, like, I can add that, and I'm not going to because we don't need this. It doesn't do anything. But you can see, like, I have 113 entries here, and I can copy and paste them and modify them, but it's still not a great process. And then I have to go in to make an actual crafting station. This name is just for naming it so you can keep track of them. And I enter in the indexes of all the recipes. This is not the best, like, interface for it. It's what I got. It's functional. Now, could I make an external program to be able to make the file that this is actually reading? Probably, but then that's more stuff that I'm doing on top of it all, and it's just at a certain point, like, why are you working with this tool when you're no longer really able to work with it, right? And that's crafting is an important part of this game, and this brings me to like some of the other things that I wanted to do. One of the big ones was I wanted to use this icon set that comes default with RPG Maker MV as like thoroughly as I could. So I'm going to use all of the weapon icons, all of the armor icons. I don't know, all of these, all of the item icons, all of the like food icons, all of the these are what I'm using for crafting materials, for example. These are cooking ingredients. And so like trying to use all of these icons, and of course a couple that I added for various purposes, is the idea was to simplify, not needing to make a bunch of icon art because that's a bunch of additional work. But the problem that then develops is I get very restricted in certain things. I need to go like, okay, here are my types. For example, where I have, fire, ice, lightning, water. This became metal and this became earth. This is, a different one rebranded, but it's like, as I kind of did some color manipulation on them. Like, I didn't leave this entirely unedited, as you can see with this row here. But one of the things that did is it meant that I had a bunch of different weapons. I had to figure out how they were all different, who could use them, all that sort of stuff, and things like that. Figuring out what I was doing with the levels as well, because, like, again, I wanted to try to lean into what RPG Maker does, and then I didn't, right? And this is partly my own fault, but what are the curves? And then I had this whole curve system and trying to like figure out how to balance it, and then it became really hard to balance, and then differentiating all the characters. So I'm kind of running all over the place. Let's try to go topically a little bit. Some of this will be a little bit repeat. So let's talk about the overambitions. Too many worlds to design for is to some extent part of the overambition here. Of all of these different world regions. It's doable, but it is a lot. Making all of these maps is also doable, but a lot. Do I enjoy making maps? Kinda, sometimes. Because this is important, right? Ultimately, what's happened is my passion for this project doesn't really exist anymore. It's questionable how much it fully existed in the first place versus how much I was just wanting to try to figure out something that could be simple that I could get done and then accidentally made it explode like I tend to do. Like, I just have a tendency to just make things explode into too much complexity. As I have expressed. And so, like, you're, like, all of this world region, like, there's just so much world here to fill out. Like, this ends up being a lot of work of, like, okay, what's differentiated about this fortress versus that fortress versus that fortress versus that fortress, for example. Or, what's going on in this city area, and how is this, like, city different from that city? Or how am I filling out stuff with Sindire, which is underground? What's going on there? And I ended up like setting myself up for a ton of places to make, and now I'm worrying about like, okay, how's everything connected together, and what do these maps look like? And it just starts becoming a lot. And then we get to another big issue, which I think is really, really, really important to talk about, which is combat balance. So combat balance really involves a lot of the aspects of this game, and a lot of the stuff that kind of becomes difficult. Because I was trying to work with levels and I wanted to make levels meaningful, I should probably actually take an aside here and talk about my feelings on levels in games. In general, I'm not a big fan of leveling up in games, but this needs to be qualified. I think levels where you just get stats aren't really interesting most of the time. This is because what I typically find interesting in games is where getting a level is meaningful in terms of mechanically what you do. So let's talk a little bit about some games that I've played that have levels in them. The Souls series, Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3 all have levels. These levels, to an extent, just make your character slightly stronger. But more interestingly, as you get various level breakpoints, you get access to new abilities, whether that's a new piece of equipment that has a requirement that you're now able to meet, or if it's a spell that you can now make use of. A lot of it is that sort of thing, right? It's you now have access to something that makes it that way things play a little bit differently because you have access to new stuff. Getting levels also is kind of rewarding because it means that you've done something with those souls, right? That's on you. It's not just something that's loose to lose when you die. And there's a certain reward factor to that I think is really easy to overlook, and I hadn't thought about it until just now, quite frankly. But like as I think about it, like one of the things that makes getting levels rewarding in Dark Souls is the fact that that's currency that you have now made use of and aren't going to lose the next time you die. Yeah, you get a little bit stronger, but it's not just about getting a little bit stronger, right? It's about keeping a resource that you had worked to acquire. So, like, that's an aspect. Or Pokemon. Pokemon has levels. For the most part, most Pokemon, when they get a level, just get a little bit stronger. That's really about it. It's not that meaningful. Sure, there's whether or not you suddenly are making speed tiers or something like that. We can get complicated, but it's not really that exciting to get a level in Pokemon. Except you have a team of 6 Pokemon that all level at slightly different rates, that all get abilities at different times in terms of new moves, and that all evolve differently. And there's a lot of orthogonal advancement as well in the form of, like, character progression to me is interesting when you get new capabilities, right? And in Pokemon, there's a lot of, like, non-level based character progression. You can get technical machines, move tutors, I guess technical records now, because I decided the old version of technical machines was a good idea, actually. There were HMs at one point, which opened up more mobility on the world, but I'm glad those are gone because that was terrible. We're not here to talk about that. Although, there should be a link to my Discord down below if you want to talk about HMs. I guess we could. There's evolution methods through things like evolution stones. So there's all these different like ways in which your Pokemon change and become more powerful or play differently based upon other things aside from levels in addition to levels. So to me, leveling up in Pokemon is not fun in and of itself, but getting access to new moves and everything being at slightly different paces in which things happen keeps getting experience interesting. Because maybe one Pokemon is real boring in the experience it gets for a long time. Like, it's just getting levels, and those levels aren't interesting. But then it gets a new move. But you have another Pokemon, like, say your Caterpie. You know what's great about Caterpie and Weedle? They evolve at low levels. That means you get that excitement of getting evolutions early on, and then they fade out because Beedrill and Butterfree are not the best Pokemon. So maybe you want to fade them out for other Pokemon that do better things. But by that point, like, the pacing and stuff, it just works really well to keep things engaged, right? So all this to kind of say, like, in general principle, I don't find getting levels in and of themselves to be a fun or exciting experience. It's what is meaningful about getting levels. Why am I interested in getting levels? How is that an enjoyable experience that kind of resonates with me? So when it comes to, I mean, this is for crying out loud. The normal thing that I was using doesn't work anymore, so we're just over here. When we look at where is level distributions? Nope, this is levels for things. Maybe it's in math overview. I don't remember where I put it. Somewhere around here, I have an enormous spreadsheet. There's too many friggin' spreadsheets here. I would have thought it was. Okay, this is not the most exciting thing, but basically somewhere I have a thing that I did to be like, oh, maybe it's over here. Nope. It doesn't matter. I did a thing where I was like, okay, what level do you get your skill at? And I seriously thought it would have been in here somewhere. But level distributions isn't it. Weapon planning is like what weapons do. Other equipment is what they do. Equipment use planning? Like I have this enormous spreadsheet of like which characters get what weapons and equipment to try to make things diverse, right? I would have thought that I had, because I remember making it an enormous thing of like, okay, here's the levels. I mean, this scrolls way down. I don't know why that has 1,000 rows. But anyway, it doesn't really matter. The point is that I was trying to make sure that these things were extremely diverse in terms of the timing in which characters get levels. So that way, depending upon which character you get, they get their skill at a certain time, and it makes it more interesting to get the skill from. There's a spreadsheet somewhere, and I just don't know where it is. And I don't want to spend a bunch of time looking for it. But if we look at our classes, you can see like level 30, 40, 53, 56. Like I did a bunch of stuff to try to make sure that these were spread out, so that way you'd get stuff at interesting times, right? So that's based on like levels, and then I also was trying to make it so that way levels are relevant. So that way, if you face something that's a certain strength greater than you, it's a bad idea to fight it, and you want to go to specific areas based upon how strong you are. And I'm basically trying to like stitch together two things that don't fit together very well, but that's part of the complication. So figuring out how strong various enemies were is kind of a pain, and things like that. And then we get into another part of my brain, which is I like having non-level based character progression, right? One of my favorite games of all time is Guild Wars 1, which I have a bunch of VODs of my streams for that game on this channel. And part of what I like about that game is a lot of your progression is based on getting skills. Like you reach maximum level very quickly in that game with, some caveats of if you're playing prophecies or not. But generally speaking, you spend most of your time at maximum level, but your character progresses by getting access to new skills by acquiring them, right? And so having this sort of system of customization where you have a broad swath of skills that you need to pick among, and then you're customizing your character based upon what skills you're actually equipping at any given time. This is something that I'm super into, and I really, really, really like. And so we get to the a bunch of ideas that I have for that. So, I mean, this is more useful to talk about over here or something. Oh man, we have so many different armor types. So we have the skill sets. We also have equipment with skills on them. Because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get at that idea, right? That idea. But okay, so this is where we run into me dealing with the tool that I'm working with again. And this is, again, something that's just really important to emphasize. A lot of my ambitions, a lot of what I want to accomplish with this project just become really, really difficult because I am working in RPG Maker and because of its limitations. And it's not that I couldn't change things to make them work the way that I want them to. It's that figuring out how and figuring out the workarounds and then dealing with that in the user interface as it's presented just becomes an enormous pain in the rear end. So, again, possible? Yes. Do I want to make that happen? No, because I would rather work in something like Unity where I'm building it from the ground up in terms of the overlying code on top of the base engine to work the way that I want it to. So what do I have? I have skill sets. That's a way that I'm trying to capture some of that Guild Wars 1 feel. And we have other like equipment that will have stuff on it, skills on it, to try to capture some of that feel. Like I have an entire category in here of these are the character skills, of which there are many. We'll talk about the skill problem in a moment. But we have a bunch of equipment skills, like a dagger with backstab on it, or antidote being on armor, or a fire arrow on bows, or like these are things that come attached to a piece of equipment, like fierce thrust being here a sword skill that you get on a sword or on a spear. Talking enough that I needed some water here. But like so you get the idea of like, oh, there's all of these different skills that I need to apply to weapons, and because I'm trying to what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to capture that sense of building, that sense of like there's a bunch of different skills available, but you can't get them all at once, that I love from Guild Wars 1. And RPG Maker's is not great for it. And so realistically, what I'd want is I'd want skill slots. And it's like, oh, you can slot in stuff for those skills, but it just doesn't work well. So let's talk about the skill problem. This is another important part of combat balance, but the skill problem fundamentally comes down to I need too many skills and I don't have enough knobs to differentiate them. This goes into sort of the base combat system and how I'm trying to build stuff. Again, there's a lot of Guild Wars 1 influence here, and it is not for the best, I think. So we have our two different possible costs. We have MP and TP. Would I have chosen these if they were not built into the system? I have no idea. But MP is... I'm basically trying to mimic energy from Guild Wars 1. So for those who do not know anything about Guild Wars 1, I need to give you a little bit of an understanding of how that works, because this is what I'm trying to copy. So in Guild Wars 1, you have an energy pool. At base, it's 20 maximum energy and 2 pips of energy regeneration. 1 pip of energy it's a real-time game, so 1 pip of energy regeneration represents the return of 1/3 of an energy per second. So that means you'll get 1 energy back every 3 seconds for each pip of energy regeneration you have. It's not exactly that because it's a continuous process, but you get the basic idea. So I'm trying to do something similar with this system here, where in Guild Wars 1, your caster characters will have more pips of energy regeneration. Most characters actually have 4 pips of energy regeneration because they get a couple pips from their armor. 4 represents getting in energy, or 1.3 repeating energy each second. That's how much you recover. It'll take you, what is it? 4 energy every 3 seconds, I guess is what that returns. And so, I think something like that. I don't feel like fully doing the math right now, but you get the basic idea. Yeah. 4 energy every 3 seconds. So, but it's kind of like continuous through that whole process. Anyway, and then you'll also typically get more maximum energy. I was trying to sort of take that idea, right? It's a very constant thing, the way that energy works. It's kind of the backbone of the combat system. It's very similar in terms of mechanical significance, mechanical role to what mana or what land cards do in Magic the Gathering, for those who have played that. So I'm trying to duplicate the system with MP in this. And that means that I needed to be very specific on what your maximum MP was. Like originally I wasn't, and then that was causing problems with trying to cost stuff. And then you have an MP regeneration rate, which I'm trying to have be sort of the backbone of the combat system. I don't think I leaned into it quite as much as I needed to, but we can talk about that later. So I had like a baseline of 3 regeneration, and then your equipment could increase it, but I needed to have it interact with TP. So TP is, so basically in the system, MP, you have a certain cap. You can get equipment to kind of increase that cap, but that cap is like set at 60 because it's a highly divisible number, and that made it more favorable for my brain. It's great for time as well. And then you have... that has a certain regeneration rate at which, like the rate at which you recover energy. I don't think I had the right balance for combat in this game anyway. And I think part of what's difficult is, just kind of back up and talk philosophy a little bit here. Part of what's difficult for me with trying to figure out how to balance stuff in this game is knowing how easy normal combat should be versus boss encounters, versus higher level encounters, how often you should get either type. Wanting to kind of make it so that way any enemy feels dangerous in a Dark Souls sense, or even just like the enemies are competent in the same sense of like Guild Wars. And that's not really what you want for an RPG like this when you have all these random encounters and stuff. You want most enemies to be like effectively throwaway trash mobs a lot of the time. Trying to figure out how to make those interesting to fight is important, but you don't necessarily want battles to drag on. And so like, yeah, I'll touch on this more later on the sort of what now sort of section I'm probably going to wrap this whole thing up with. But have like Pokemon sort of pacing where stuff goes down really easily for just like random battles, like a random wild Pokemon take like a hit or whatever. More of your time in Pokemon is often spent in the like intro and exits to the fight animations and like effects. Like, so if you think about Pokemon, right? Assuming you've played it, but if you think about Pokemon, what happens when you get a random encounter is it has this whole like swirly down thing or however they're doing the effect to transition you to the battle screen. And then you have like a period of like introduction, like you encountered a wild Psyduck or whatever. I don't know why I picked Psyduck there. But you encountered a wild whatever, Snorlax, sure. And now you need to battle this thing. And then the battle is over. You select a move, and then you do the move, and the battle's over because you just one-shot the thing, because that's where things are at. Or maybe, at different points, maybe it takes like 3 shots, but it doesn't take that long. And especially if you're at higher level, like the battle can go super quickly, and then you have to like resolve out of the battle and get back to the screen. And that whole process of going into the battle can be longer, and like the animations around the battle can be longer than the battle itself. Because it moves very, very quickly. And so just trying to figure out how I wanted to pace stuff, how I wanted to balance stuff, how long you needed to be in a fight. I don't think I had the right headspace for it. Oh man, this is another thing. The complete tangent. So, sorry, bumped the microphone there. Complete tangent, but I was just noticing how I have critical rate here, plus 60%, because this is your magical accuracy, but you can't rename what this is in the engine, so it just says critical rate, so I just have to remember that it's a completely different stat, because I've changed it under the hood. That's annoying. It would have been really nice if there was a way to rename stuff inside the editor. But back on topic. So figuring out some of this like combat pacing was something I don't think I fully did properly. And is a little bit difficult to figure out where I want things to actually land in the first place. But what the energy regeneration system works best when battles are drawn out. When you're burning through your MP and you're not able to get it all back, and you're running low on resources, and it's making you have to make decisions about what you want to use and stuff. So just figuring out how to balance that was a bit of a trick. And I'm not sure I fully got there. But the other resource is TP, which builds up when you hit enemies. Which means that those moves are intrinsically not available at the beginning of combat, which means you have to work up to them, which means you're generally going to just be doing a lot of normal attacking leading up to that, or there's just a lot of stuff with that I'm basically trying to mimic Adrenaline from Guild Wars 1 with TP, and I don't think it's entirely successful. In part because... Okay, let's discuss how Adrenaline works in Guild Wars 1 so you can understand the contrast. So in Guild Wars 1, you can have skills that require a resource called Adrenaline. These skills charge up a certain rate. So there's something called a strike of Adrenaline. It's actually like 25 Adrenaline is one strike. And it gets a little messy under the hood, but... Basically, to try to simplify the system a little bit, you accumulate strikes of Adrenaline. You get one full strike whenever you hit an enemy in combat, like with an auto attack or any attack, anything that's a proper attack and not a like spell, or like some non-attack skill. So if it's an attack skill or just an auto attack, it builds a strike of Adrenaline, and taking damage will get you a little bit of Adrenaline as well, but not a full strike usually. So this is kind of what you need to know about Adrenaline. So when you use a skill that uses Adrenaline, it consumes, like each skill has its own pool of Adrenaline. And so when you use a skill that uses Adrenaline, it drains one strike of Adrenaline from all of your skills. But this means all of your other skills are one strike away from being where they had been. So if that was an attack skill and you land, then they're back up to being where they were. So a good example of this is if you have a couple of skills that cost... if you have a skill that costs 8 Adrenaline and one that costs 6, and you have both skills have their Adrenaline full, and you use the 8 Adrenaline skill, the 6 Adrenaline skill will go down to 5 Adrenaline. And then if that was an attack skill with the 8 and you hit, the 6 Adrenaline skill will go back up to 6, right? Because it went down to 5 and then back up to 6 when you hit, and then you can immediately use that. This like individual container of Adrenaline functions very differently in terms of how attack skills work that rely on Adrenaline, as well as how much you want to use skills that are not attack skills that will not give you Adrenaline back when you are like doing stuff with combat as well. Because if you use a skill that uses Adrenaline that doesn't isn't an attack, then everything will be down by one strike. And so you still need to hit to get them back up. But like, it's a very different system to what TP is, which is a singular resource that drains as you use skills and refills as you hit. So that like requires a different mindset about how to balance things. And I don't think is entirely successful in this system because it means too many skills are locked behind needing to just auto attack until you've built up enough adrenaline to act, or enough TP to be able to actually use them. And it means that skills that use TP cannibalize each other more than skills that use adrenaline in Guild Wars 1 do. And if I'm bringing a Guild Wars 1 style of like trying to balance stuff into this system, it doesn't translate properly. So there's some stuff with that going on as well. Again, this project is hugely trying to be like 2 Guild Wars 1E in a system that's just not set up to function enough the same way. Time for some water. Remember to stay hydrated, folks, even when you're watching YouTube videos. Okay, so we have some of these things that are issues with trying to balance combat that I've talked at length about now. And kind of where my mental space is with these resources, and with trying to balance skills and stuff. Now, let's talk about, just trying to get my head around into the next subject. So let's talk about continuing on this broader theme of too much stuff. I wanted to capture some of this idea of each area has its own way of doing things. All of these different world regions have these different things. I want these different skill sets in order to be able to make characters like feel different and have customization to try to capture some of that Guild Wars 1 flavor. And so we have where did I put it? It's in here somewhere. We have skill sets. We have skill sets. I feel like I'm missing something from here. Weapon planning, other equipment story beats, equipment use planning. Yeah, there's got to be something here for NPC categories, zone completion checklist, damage type conversions. I don't think that's a thing that really became a thing. We're just going to click on all of these until I find the thing that makes sense. Nope, definitely not that. Definitely not that. Oh, here they are, skill sets. Haha. I wonder if this has the gigantic... No. Okay, so here you can see where I was trying to like plan out who gets access to all of the skill sets and all that sort of stuff, which ended up being quite a process. But you'll see that I have 8 skill sets. I have Spell Sword, Destruction Magic, Healing Magic, Enchanter, Weapon Arts, Martial Arts, Tools, and Guardian. These are roughly like these ones here. The first 4 are roughly magic, and the second 4 are roughly like physical. That's kind of the idea. That's kind of the breakdown. And you'll also notice that I have right here a whole other list of things: Base, Kendra, Sacriton, Your God Est, etc., down to Evanshire. There are, for reference, 15 of these because these are for each world region. Each world region would get a copy of, or like would get their own take on this skill set concept, right? So what does it mean to be a spell sword? I mean, this is kind of the idea of like you're a physical attacker that uses magic in your attacks. Like you augment your attacks with magic, right? Destruction magic is just like raw offensive magic at a thing. What does it mean? Like your black mage, right? This is your white mage. This is your like just physical attacks with your weapon. These are physical attacks without a weapon. These are just different things here, right? Don't need to go over all of this right now. But each area would have its own take on it. Bases should actually probably be renamed to divine. These are the divine skills that you can get in the very starting area that then you can upgrade these skill sets as you progress through the game is kind of the idea. So roughly, these should have, on average, 3 skills apiece, probably around 3 to 5. But let's say if we're working with an average of 3, 8. Let's just do it down here, right? 8 times 15 for 15 skill sets times 3 skills apiece is 360 skills. That is not counting equipment skills, like on other pieces of equipment. This is not counting character skills. Like the characters all have something like 13 times 14 for 182 additional skills. I can double check that very easily. Yep, 13 on the Sage, and it looks like 12 on the others. Yeah, because the Sage has to start off with 2, otherwise it doesn't work. So what we actually have here is we have plus 1. So we have 169, which is 13 squared, which is kind of neat. Skills on the like character skills. Okay, so let's just add these together. Oh, that's 529 skills. And again, this is not counting skills on other pieces of equipment. This is not counting if this is higher. Like, if this is not an average of 3, if this is an average of 4, we're jumping up to 649 skills. And this is not counting, like, skills that are specific to monsters either. These are just skills on pieces of equipment. You get the idea. And, I mean, we can even talk about the number of skills in each line, right? This is, like let's say this is our average of 3 times 15. 45 skills for Spell Sword across all of these, right? And that's going to be the case for each of these. I start running into a very real design issue with 649 skills of making them not just a mush. Not making them just like, how is this one different than this one? The numbers are slightly different. Yay. Where's the, like, I run into real design space problems. Is this solvable? Potentially. Does it matter? To an extent. How much can I compensate by having it be like a more unique mix for the skill set of like, oh, this skill set covers these elements, this skill set covers those elements. Maybe to an extent I can do that. How complex do things start getting? My design space is fairly limited. These costs are clunky to work with to an extent. It just becomes a system in which I need to make a lot, and I mean a lot of skills with very few tools for differentiating them. This becomes especially true because the states that I can use are extremely limited because of the icons I have for representing them are very limited because I decided these are the icons that I have to work with, right? And so this is like, if I break away from that, all of a sudden my skills open up a lot in terms of being able to add additional effects, but only within certain margins. So the basic problem of like, how do I make in this system 45 to 60 spell sword skills that all feel appropriately differentiated from each other, appropriately flavored to the area they're from, where they don't step too much on these other skills. And this is another important thing. I have 14 classes, well, functionally 13 that I need to worry about with because of the way that the Sage works, but still, where they have their own mechanical twist that they are adhering to. They're not getting stepped on too much by skill sets. They're differentiated from each other where they feel like they're very different characters. All of this is doable, I think, to an extent, but I just don't have very many knobs to turn. I have costs, I have how many things it can hit, and I have, like, the amount of damage it deals, but it's a very, very, like, it's a big challenge to try to make all of these things differentiated, right? And the ability that I have to make things distinct is limited. So it's just, I don't feel a desire to spend a lot of time making a bunch of skills that are effectively glutting everything up. Again, if we go to Pokemon, because I think this is a really good point of comparison that I have knowledge of. If we look at Pokemon, there is a bunch of skills or a bunch of moves that effectively, like, don't really mean a whole lot. Like, okay, so let's talk about, like, this is something you see a lot in RPGs, tiering up of skills. So, like, in Final Fantasy, you have Fire, then Fire Firaga, that sort of thing. In Pokemon, you have Tackle, which tends to be kind of a baseline weak skill. And then you have something like Headbutt, which is a bit stronger. And you can kind of move up from there to, I don't know, Double Edge or something. We're jumping ahead a little bit, but like Return maybe. Or like with electric attacks, you have like Thunder Shock, Discharge, Thunderbolt, Thunder, where we have like different different tiers, and I don't necessarily remember all of the like low mid ones. But like, how often are you going to use bulldoze over earthquake, as an example? Bulldoze is 60 base power and lower speed by a stage. Earthquake is just straight up 100 power. And so what you kind of have is you have this like progression system where they can have a lot of moves where it's just like you never would use, like if you were to be able to pick any move in the game that that Pokemon can learn, to have that Pokemon know. Like if you're building a competitive Pokemon, you'd never use Tackle because there's no reason to use Tackle. There's no point in which you ever want to use Tackle. It is a terrible move. It is made to be a terrible move. It's made to be a move that you have early, that you lose early. Lose as quickly as you can to replace it with something better. You want to replace Tackle with Headbutt. You want to replace it with Strength. You want to replace it with Return. Because you want to get to more powerful moves that just do more damage. There's no reason to not replace Tackle with a better move. I think Tackle's a really good example of this, but there's basically kind of like this tier of moves where it's like these are the moves that are actually relevant, right? Your Thunderbolt and Thunder versus Discharge. Like that's a whole discussion to have because Discharge has a higher paralyze rate. Thunder has less accuracy and more power. Thunderbolt has more accuracy and less power. So, whether or not you want to use Thunder versus Thunderbolt is a discussion. Whether or not you want to use Flamethrower versus Fire Blast, or whether or not you want to use Double Edge versus Return on a Pokemon that can learn both, of course. These are all relevant discussions, but it's not a relevant discussion to say whether or not you want to use Rock Throw versus Stone Edge the vast majority of the time. The only reason why you'd possibly ever want to use Rock Throw is maybe if there's a technician stab thing that you can do. Like there's extenuating circumstances for a lot of these things, right? But the basic point that I'm making is like when you are playing at optimum, like this properly competes with other things tier, you're running into this sort of band of like these are the moves that you use. Everything else is garbage that you ignore once you get to that point. Like, it's the stuff that they give you early so that way you can level up to better stuff later. And that's kind of the spot that a lot of stuff is in. With skill sets, I want to avoid having skills that do that. I could theoretically have a skill set where it's like, this skill set has one really good move on it, and the other moves are kind of garbagey that you just kind of have to bring along if you want that good move. But then skill sets are kind of like competing in a different area. Like basically I want it to be where skill sets that you get in like equipment in general, as I recall, that you get at the beginning of the game is just as valid later in the game. I like this sort of flat power curve in terms of like the stuff you have access to. Like this is something that I really like. I really like it from Guild Wars 1 in particular. That's a big area where I'm influenced, right? Where I like this sort of flatness because I think it's more interesting. Personally, I think it's more interesting when stuff kind of works that way, where the stuff that I got early in the game is just as valid later in the game as it is early in the game. That's just something that I personally prefer. It's just a personal design preference, and that carries with it complication. Like I could make it so that way skill sets are like, oh yeah, this area is bad at this thing, so this is bad. But then your skill sets are no longer competing on the strength of the skill set itself. They're competing among skill sets for like, what's the one that seems to have the fewest bad skills on it? And I don't think that's really interesting. I don't like that sort of design area. I don't like making skills just to demonstrate that something is bad at that thing. I don't think that that's a good use of that skill. And it's very difficult with the number of skills that I need to make with this system to not have that start to come into play. I think having a system that has a narrower band that basically just cuts out the fluff, that starts you off at Thunderbolt and makes you choose between Thunderbolt and Thunder. Which one do you prefer? Or like Discharge, right? Rather than, you're able to finally level up Thundershock to, I don't know. What's the next tier of like electric attack that's better than Thundershock, but's also special? It's been a while since I've played Pokemon, and I don't typically think about those. Like, Spark is there, but that's physical. But you get the idea. I don't need to pick out the specific thing. You get the basic idea, I hope, at this point. And if not, let me know in the comments, and I can try to clarify better. So it's just one of those things where the number of knobs I have to turn for skills to be able to try to balance stuff, to try to pace things, becomes very, very difficult. And I just don't have the drive to try to figure that out. So, and then we can get into other stuff. Like trying to figure out enemy balance, of course, has been a gigantic pain in the rear end because I don't have any baseline to work from and I have to figure it out. And the way that I'm trying to do the curve of like things becoming increasingly dangerous just wasn't working the way I wanted it to. And there's lots of reasons for that. I think fundamentally that this project would have worked better. And maybe it's worth going back. But if instead of having 99 levels, this is something on actors, instead of having 99 levels, if I'd had 12 and just had more distance between each level, I think that would have fundamentally work better. Because then you spend your time in Kendra at level 1, and when you get to level 2, you're like finally strong enough to move off of Kendra or something like that. And maybe it's worth it to go back and try to restructure everything, but that's not an exercise I feel like undertaking currently. And like even if I do that, that doesn't solve some of the other problems. So let's talk about some of those other problems. Lore writing. Let's talk about lore writing. So there's so much lore writing that I have to do for this friggin' game if I want to do it properly. I have to write lore for each town. I have to write lore for like all sorts of locations. I have to write lore for every single piece of equipment. It's the sort of thing where it's like, oh, this idea sounds really cool. And then you figure out, oh, what do I have to do for this? Oh, that's a lot. Where doing all of that just starts becoming more and more and more of a task. And there's just so much of it in this game. And like that includes putting a bunch of lore out in the world where the player can go find it, and then needing to have stuff tracked back into the journal with the way that that interface works is really being awkward as all get out. There's just so much of that. It's just, I'm kind of running out of wind a little bit at this point in time as well. And this video is getting pretty long. But it's like making all the lore, making quests. You know what I realize I don't really enjoy? Trying to make quests with the absolutely frustrating nature of how RPG Maker works. Like, if I just go to this warehouse, you see this guy with this quest, and why did I decide I wanted a day-night cycle in RPG Maker MV is beyond me. It's because day-night cycles are cool, but RPG Maker is a terrible place to try to make them. Okay, I come up to that because guess what? This guy is not here at night, so if it's nighttime, he's not here, and that means I have to have additional stuff to compensate for that. But it's like, this is a very simple quest. This guy wants you to give him a bunch of fruit. So what I have to do, I have to introduce the quest, I have to add the quest to your quest log, I have to write the quest log item because friggin' I don't have a separate quest log sort of thing. Like, keeping track of that's a pain in the rear end, so it's just a hidden item. That gets added so that the quest log viewer can then show it, which, you know, I'm happy with that system, but it's still. And now that you have the quest, you can, if you have enough oranges, you can give him the oranges, and he'll give you the bounty slip. Then I have to set that you got the quest taken care of. I have to remove the quest from your inventory. And now he has like a standard thing that he'll say afterwards. But I also have to sync it with this item, which needs to disappear at night. And then the do you have the thing to deliver it still needs to disappear at night, and also needs to disappear when you finish the quest. Like, there's just a bunch of like little steps of overhead where there's not, like, if there's an automated system of being able to just like tag this NPC as having an active, like a non-taken quest, basically a quest to give, a quest in progress. If I had those two things as like flags that I could just mark on it, so that way this thing would automatically appear and disappear when I'm done, that would make things simpler. If it was basically like, so in a 3D program, and you could do this in a 2D program too, but in a 2D or 3D instance in a more complicated, a more advanced engine, you would have the ability to add this, like, the marker above their head, right? And it would be able to show up and do the thing that's supposed to do, but it would be attached to that thing. So if that thing wasn't there, the marker wouldn't be there, and it would just be very easy to have it like disappear at night when the guy doesn't show up and know it has to be a separate thing. Like, these are little things, but they add up, right? And this is kind of my point. Like, I just don't have enough passion about making quests to flesh out this world to go through the rigmarole of adding all of these quests, of adding in all of the hooks, of keeping track of everything. Because it's all on an event-by-event basis. There's no, like, through line, so I have to take external notes about how everything fits together. And that's just not how I want to spend my time designing games. If it is how you want to spend your time, cool. More power to you. Make something awesome. But it's not how I want to spend my time. And this is what kind of, like, fundamentally things come down to, is just, like, yeah, I could put this together, but I don't, like, I'm just not passionate enough about it. The things that I have to do in order to be able to make the game that I theoretically think I'm trying to, like, want to make, to actually spend the time to make it. And so I'm just kind of stepping back. And so let's talk about a couple of other things. This could show up, like Astral Collision as a setting, could show up again in another engine, probably like Unity. There's a couple of things that I would be doing there. One of the big ones is I would probably make it a tactics game, because you know what makes it a heck of a lot easier to make 690 skills, or whatever the heck that number was, 700, 800, 1,000 skills, is having positional stuff going on. Having position matter in the system opens up a huge swath of additional parameters, because I can suddenly make a skill where it's like, it has this sort of AoE pattern, or it's a point-blank skill versus a ranged skill, or here's its range, or like it has a minimum range. Like, there's a lot of different ways of being able to configure skills all of a sudden when you have the ability to have range involved in any way. I probably would want to also, like, redo some of how TP works, where, like, movement builds TP or something. I don't know. I'd have to actively think about it. There's a lot of stuff that need to be reworked, but it'd make it a lot easier to track so many things. It'd be so much easier to, like, enter in information. It would mean that I'd not be limited to the space constraints of RPG Maker windows, which talk about not having enough room to display information to the player. Boy, howdy. So there's just so many different things that kind of get solved or eased up by working in a different engine. I'm trying to do stuff with this engine that it was not designed to do. And that doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means that you have to put in a lot more work in dealing with stuff in the engine, and it's just not worth it. So if this setting does show up again, which it very well could, I don't dislike the setting. I don't dislike the ideas. I dislike the trying to make it in this particular tool, because it's just so much of a pain in the rear end to keep track of everything. I'd want something where it would be easier to have NPCs have specific patterns, like kind of like Majora's Mask or whatever, where it's like they follow this routine. Would be a lot easier in another engine. Not having, because, like, one of the reasons why I have to have those splash screens for transitioning day-night cycles is to hide NPCs appearing and disappearing. But then I have to worry about, like, what if they appear, or where the player is, and things like that, which is another potential nightmare, right? So just a different engine that can add additional, like, knobs for me to turn for balancing stuff, that can present things in a different way. I think that's just a better place to do it. And I'd absolutely use the stuff that I've done here as a reference. But that's kind of, like, long-term with this, where I'm kind of thinking there's probably a lot more stuff for me to talk about in terms of, like, overambition, but basically the scope of everything just exploded too much, and it has made it to be, like, it was something that I was wanting to avoid have happen, and I tried to avoid having certain things occur that cause scope to explode, and then I just walked into exploding the scope again, and that's just kind of, that's the short version, the TLDR, which I don't know how you got here with missing that. So that brings up to what now? What am I doing now? If I've stepped away from this, what have I been doing? So the answer to that question kind of, I don't remember for sure if I said this in the hiatus introduction video, and I meant to rewatch it before I started this, and then I didn't. because I was like, okay, I've psyched myself up to do this, and then I forgot to watch that hiatus video to see if I mentioned it or not, but or if I've mentioned it at another point. But I started up a secondary project while I was working on Astral Collision because I wanted to explore ideas that I'd had that didn't fit into the design of Astral Collision. And so I'm working on that right now. I'm just as intending to finish it as I'm intending to finish Astral Collision, which means maybe I will or maybe I won't, but my intention is to do so, for all the good that intention means. The project itself, I'm just currently tentatively calling it Psychopomps Are Missing. Psychopomp being a word for basically a fancy term for something like a reaper or an envoy or some sort of like farrier of the souls of the dead to their final resting place. And so the context of that game, again, it's an RPG Maker project where I'm exploring different things, but the context of that game is basically reality is falling apart because I like that theme apparently, but much fewer places and no overworld, just a bunch of interconnected zones. Nothing has to follow logically because everything's falling apart, and you're just trying to kind of take out the people that are making it fall apart and find all of the psychopomps so that way things can get fixed. That's kind of the basic goal of it. This is with very set, specific characters, and I'm going to have much more of a linear story. Most of the characters are going to arrive right away. It's far fewer characters. They're going to be actual characters. And I'm making icons for it, which solves some of the issues that I had here, obviously. The other thing is there's just probably going to be far fewer skills. This combat system feels better to me as well. TP, I've rebranded as stamina, and you start off battle with 100 of it. You regenerate 25 every turn, and every skill uses some amount except for the default defensive option of dodging. Not blocking, dodging. Blocking requires specific stuff to be able to block with. It absorbs into your stamina, like Dark Souls shields. The other thing is that this game is much more heavily inspired by Pokemon, a game in the freaking genre that RPG Maker works in, even if it's quite different for that genre, but, so everything's balanced around the Pokemon stat formula and the Pokemon combat formula. Like, I just went and grabbed how they do their damage calculation, and I'm like, I'm going to just use that because you know what? I understand how Pokemon base power works. I understand how Pokemon base stats work. Everything's balanced a lot more flatly overall. And the pursuit of a variety, there's just so many more knobs to turn with this stamina system than with the way TP works in this. I just can't even begin to express. You still have MP and stuff uses that, but this is one of those things that's really interesting is working on this other project. I'm like, you know what? MP works great if I don't have regeneration on it as a adventure resource. So there's basically a battle resource and then there's a multi-battle resource. So MP is a multi-battle resource. Stamina is a single battle resource, whereas you use it, it gets low and then you have to wait for it to recharge. So I can balance skills by having huge costs. So suddenly the other skills, but anyway, it works a lot better. So the goal is take down these 8 gym leaders and then the Elite 4 and champion. I'm using that sort of structure because I understand that structure because of playing most of the Pokemon games, except the most recent ones, because nothing against them. I just didn't get them. And I but that basic gym structure of okay, I understand this structure, and you just go around collecting psychopomps and defeating these not gym leaders and using a combat system that I have a better handle on, so I can balance it more easily. That sort of thing. So I'm not planning on recording any videos about it for various personal reasons, but that is what I'm doing right now. I'm happy to kind of discuss some stuff from it. If you want to, you can go join my Discord and talk to me about it. But for now, nothing's going to be happening from Astral Collision, and it's just it's not a like I don't want to make this project an RPG Maker at this point in time. That's kind of what it kind of comes down to. So, is there anything else I need to say, or has this video gone on long enough at over an hour? Probably gone on long enough at over an hour. Probably all tired of looking at Calendon. Good old Calendon. Yeah, so that's kind of where things are at. Oh, I should also say that Psychopomps, the sort of character customization thing, I'm using a class-based system, kind of not unlike some job systems I've seen in some of the Final Fantasy games. But the basic way that it works is there are 4 base. So there's a total of 24 classes divided into 3 tiers. There's the base classes of Fighter, Rogue, Wizard, and Cleric. And then there are 6 levels per class because you start at level 1, you get up to level 6, and there are 5 skills that you learn from levels 2 to 6, and that's per class. Now, characters, your playable characters can be assigned any class. However, so tier 1 classes, I forget the names of all of them, but there's basically one that's like the Fighter plus, and then Rogue plus, etc. And then there's one that's like Fighter plus Rogue, and Rogue plus Mage is Ninja, for example. I remember that one. So there's all of these like combination classes. And so if you want to make a character a fighter, from the Fighter's increased class, which I think is Warrior, you have to get all 6 levels of Fighter. You have to accumulate all of those levels. If you want to get from Fighter, or if you want to get, say, Ninja, which is the Rogue plus Mage, you just have to get the first 3 skills in each. So that's like level 4. So you can skip the last 2 levels, which require more experience anyway. And that allows you to be able to jump to a Ninja. Of course, you'd be down a couple of skills that you could potentially gain access to, but you can jump straight to Ninja. And then the tier 2 requires you to get maxed out in that tier 1 of class. So if you wanted to get to Knight, you'd have to get all of the experience in Warrior. Or if you want to get, and this is my little joke, if you want to get from a Ninja to a Shinobi, which is the exact same thing in Japanese, but here we are, it's a joke. There you go, from Ninja to Shinobi. But you have to get maxed out Ninja to be able to get into Shinobi. So, and then you can change your classes really with the asterisk that you have to be in a specific place to do it, but whenever you go to that place, you can change your classes. And there's a lot of different stuff that I'm doing balance-wise and things. But I'm enjoying working on this one a lot more than I have Astral Collision in quite some time, and I keep wanting to like add things to it and kind of flesh stuff out. And I'm not doing a complicated quest system. I'm not doing a journal. I'm cutting out a lot of the stuff that, like, these are things that I really like having existing in the game. It's just adding them to an RPG Maker project adds a lot of overhead, and I'm just trying to make sure I take steps to control the ambition to make sure it doesn't explode too far, doesn't cause me too many headaches. And so, like, the other thing that I've also realized is I'm much more interested in creating systems than I am in creating individual hand-designed content, if that makes sense. So let's take a step back here and like go back to that Brandon Sanderson thing that I was talking about, where it's like, what are the sort of things you like versus the sort of things that you should actually be making? And so it's like, do I like carefully hand-curated content where somebody's gone in and like done a really good job of making detailed lore and like immaculately created environments like what Dark Souls does? Yeah, absolutely. That sort of thing I love. I think it's really cool when people have taken like time to make really intricate things. But what am I passionate about actually creating? I tend to really like looking at the big picture. I like looking at systems. I like making systems interact, and I like making systems make the game for me. So I'm trying to focus on what are the interesting systems I can figure out and build, rather than what are like making a game that like maximally wants that handcrafted touch, right? So when it comes to that sort of system thing, one of the other things that I'm doing that I'm borrowing from Guild Wars 1 is the chest system from Guild Wars 1. So for those who are unfamiliar with that game, the way that this works is there are chests that just randomly spawn in a map. So you go out into an explorable map, you go out in an area where enemies are, an instanced map, and there will be chests there, and you have to use keys to open them. And if you open them, you'll get some piece of loot. And the chests randomly spawn, and where they are kind of varies. And so going out into that area and getting a key and opening a chest could be a really cool experience. Now, I personally think that the way that they've balanced what you get from the chests is not a cool experience, but this is another discussion entirely. The base concept is one that I really like, and so that's something that I'm doing in this game. So that way, when you go into a zone, it feels a little bit different, and you have something to find as you explore. And it's not like you've explored it once and now there's never any loot to find it ever again. No, what chests you'll find are going to be variant each time, but you'll find a chest and it's like, here's something with a piece of loot. Maybe it's useful to me, maybe it isn't. But, at worst I can just sell it and recoup the cost of the key, hopefully. So that sort of system is, to me, more inherently interesting than having static chests. And it's a system that I can make, and I can figure out how it works, and I can write code to make it work, and I can implement it. And then you can go and loot chests, and it's cool and exciting and things like that. So but I'm trying to step back and be like, okay, what's stuff that actually works in the system better, and where's things where I can change the system where it's really cool and I'm not creating a bunch of extra overhead for me. Because it turns out when all you have to do to make a skill, like an offensive skill, is just enter in the base power into the formula slot, and that's it. That's simple. You can add other stuff there, obviously, if you want to, but just adding in base power, that's pretty straightforward. That's pretty cool. And that makes it a lot easier to make skills as well. Easier. It's still difficult, but at least I have some conception of what the heck this even means. So anyway, I think that's going to kind of round stuff out for this. I appreciate anybody who's watched this far. Hopefully you understand at this point why astral collision is just not a thing that's happening. It would require a lot of work to rework things as it is, and at that point I'd just rather make it in a different engine. To make it a lot of work to rework it into something that I'd want to work with, and at that point I'd rather work in a different engine that makes the things that I ostensibly set out to do with it less onerous to do. So I think that's about it. Thank you all very much for watching, and until next time, everyone, take care and goodbye.